Should we? Okay. So Father has given the green light. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Have some of you just arrived this morning so that you didn't hear yesterday's talk? Some of you come back this morning. Okay, so I'm Father Silviu. I come to you from all the way from southern Texas, and specifically from the parish of St. George in Pharr, Texas. That's spelled P-H-A-R-R, but I'm sure it's a misspelling for F-A-R, because it's very, very far. And Father found me, as I said yesterday, which is in and of itself an extraordinary feat. I don't know how he found me, all the way in this forgotten corner of Texas. I assume, anyway, he invited me because I used to be a professor. I taught for 20 years at a Catholic university, actually, in Ohio. So I lived most of my life, and I'm originally from Romania. I lived most of my life with 4 seasons. But now we pretty much have 1.5, not even 2 seasons, because where I live in the subtropics, when it's winter, it gets down to 20 degrees Celsius. I'm from Europe, so I know Celsius. 70 to the ones who are not, who are likely from the United States. And he invited me to give these talks to you. I wasn't thinking to do something very formal. I ended up typing things out. I don't know why. But before I start reading the talk for today, I have to tell you that it is actually very personal to me. I will not talk about myself in this and what you'll hear soon enough, but it is actually drawn from my experience. I grew up in, as I said, in Romania, on the other side of the Iron Curtain, in the 70s and 80s. Communism fell, as some of you may remember, actually, if you're old enough, in 1989, at least in Romania, and a couple of other countries. And in the 90s, a few years afterwards, I was sent by a dear professor of mine from my seminary years in Romania to England. And here I land in England from a country that hasn't changed since the Middle Ages. I grew up, well, the first few years of my life, I spent in a small village, a village of 120 houses, very secluded. It wasn't a drive-through village, it was an end-of-the-road village. So nobody came there except people who lived there. And there were very few people who lived there. And a village that hasn't changed for more than 1,000 years. It truly was pre-medieval. And Romania didn't change, at least that village didn't change a lot in the first few years after the fall of communism. So when I went to England a few years later, after the fall of communism, I was still a pre-medieval person. Very, very ancient. Well, another reason for which I was very ancient is because I'm a Transylvanian. You see, that village is in Transylvania. And we have difficulty with staying dead, as you probably know from movies. So I was this 1,000 and some years old soul landing in the middle of capitalism in England. And I was shocked. I wasn't shocked so much by the material culture, that was shocking too. Seeing plastics, credit cards and all this stuff. Things that I'd never seen before. But the most surprising thing to me was the fact that I was in the middle of people who were human in a very different way. England was, as you know very well, one of the first industrialized countries, pretty much the initial movers of industrialization. And here I was coming to it from pre-industrial times. They were very, very different from me. So different that they didn't have different answers to my questions, but they were asking different questions altogether. They were thinking in ways in which I couldn't possibly think. Right. So for a few months, I remember the first few months there being flabbergasted. Probably that's the best way of putting it. Now that was confirmed to me yesterday after my talk by one of you who stayed behind to talk to me, and you told me you're a recent immigrant from Lebanon. And you came to Ottawa, to Canada. And the first thing that shocked you, I'm not going to put you on the spot, you know who you are, was the fact that for people here, every difficulty, every problem needs to be solved. Everything becomes a task. Some people may call it the we-can-do spirit. I would call it the must-do spirit. There's a certain thing about humanity, at least in this part of the world, which for many years was actually very strange to me. Now I've wrapped my head around it, as the expression goes. I think I understand it better. And I think I can see its impact on us, on the Orthodox, and especially on us who come from different parts of the world, who didn't grow up in North America with the we can do and we must do spirit. So my talk today ultimately comes out of this shock that I had in England, the shock that some of you had probably when you came over here. The fact that people here are just a different sort of people. By different, I don't mean bad, I just mean different. So, anyway, so let me get to why I thought I should preface what I have to say today by telling you, confessing to you, that all of this is very personal to me. So, yesterday's talk, by the way, really told stories. And for those of you who are not here, let me tell you that I told two stories. I told the story of God, the life story of God, which to some of the people here was very surprising, because I focused on a peculiar element of the life story of God, namely that the first thing that God did after He created us was to bow down to us. And the second story I told was the story of of what this does to us. And what it does to us probably was put best in words in one of the questions by one of you. And that was, I don't know what to do with it, except to pretty much fall on my knees. And that's precisely it. So those are the two stories I told yesterday. Now, at first sight, or at first hearing, I should say, those stories have solved practically nothing. In other words, they seem to have no practicality whatsoever. That's why, actually, we had so many questions afterwards, and my hope is that we will have a lot of questions today, after my short talk. In other words, although I spoke for 40 minutes, roughly, sometimes I speak too long, like I apologized yesterday, because that's all I ever did for a living, talk. And that's what I still do for a living as a priest, I just talk. And I move things from here to there, not even long distances, very short. So I spoke for 40 minutes, and although most of the talk was actually on change, on this change that the story of God wants to inflict on us, to instill in us, we seem to be left with the perennial pressing question, how? Of course, we all want to change for the good, but more often than not, we have the experience that we cannot. So how do I make this work? How do I change? In other words, we're still left without a concrete procedure, if you want. What's the procedure by which I can get myself from point A, where I am, to point B, where I want to be? And before I address this pressing question, how, I must offer you what I mentioned yesterday. Yesterday I just brought this up in passing. Today, as I promised yesterday, I will do it. Which namely is a short overview of how we got here in the crisis to which this question gives voice. The roots of our crisis actually go back to the 4th century. This is the history of the people I encountered in England for the first time. Yesterday I mentioned the 8th century, but today I want to start with the 4th century. When for the first time ever, a Christian, who by the way was facing his own sinfulness, he had a sin that he couldn't get rid of. Specifically, he had a sexual addiction. A Christian, for the first time ever, asked himself 2 new questions, questions never asked before. How do I get rid of my difficulty? And that's the first one. And the second one, what do I need to know in order to get rid of my difficulty, of his sin? It is a very important thing to understand that these questions were entirely new, never asked before, and were replacing an older way of facing a difficulty. And the older way was the way of my grandparents who raised me in the first years of my life. When they had a difficulty in their life, their instinct was not to go into themselves and asking themselves, how can I possibly gather up the strength to get rid of it? Their instinct was rather to say, Lord, help me. In whichever way you see fit. Help me to bear this if you think I should keep it. And if you think I shouldn't keep it, you take it away from me. Those are entirely different questions from the questions asked by this Christian in the 4th century. And he asked them in Latin. That's why they influenced the Western world more than they ever influenced the Eastern world. In other words, the questions abandoned these new questions. How do I get rid of my difficulty? What do I need to know in order to get rid of it? Abandon the traditional human being who placed itself at God's mercy and set up a new human being who looks for doable solutions within its own grasp. Now let's fast forward to the 8th century. Of course, this change in the 4th century triggered a chain reaction that actually can be traced all the way down to our time. And there are many episodes, there are many phases of this change that has generated the postmodern human being that deserve attention, but I'm only going to focus on a few of them. At least with you. With the young ones later on, I'll focus on another one, which I'm not even mentioning here. So, we're in the 8th century, and yesterday, I already said, due to fear, this new human, already transformed by those 4th century questions, took one more step into newness. It started to approach all things, including itself and also God, through analysis and through intellection, through understanding, and to seek very specifically procedures for all things. And it wanted to conquer all things. Of course, this new positioning of itself in front of everything made this new human a fundamentally secular being. And by the way, I mean secular being, I mean secular, not in the way in which it's often used today, but I mean it in the old way, in the etymological way, if you want. Because the word secular comes from the Latin word, which also gave us the French, and we heard this morning, siècle. And it really means secular, really originally meant a person of this age. Somebody for whom life on this side of death is all there is. Or it is what's important, even if it is not all there is. The secular person could say, yes, I believe in God, but nevertheless, and I believe in the eternity of the soul, but nevertheless, the part of life I'm focusing on is here and now. That's what I mean by secular. So secularism was invented in the 8th century. By the way, there's a lot of research on this, but research can be more. So I'm not going to give you names and books. And a secular being was invented for whom God is ultimately at a distance. He is an interventionist, a helper at best, somebody who can help from a distance. Also, the more this human being wanted to be free of its fear, the more willing it was to give up its freedom. This led this new type of being human into an environment of self-judgment and self-condemnation and self-measure. It even led to a need to be punished, which are fundamentally different strategies of renouncing freedom and responsibility at the same time. And it is very much alive. As somebody who has heard many confessions, because for quite a little bit of time, actually, I heard confessions not in my own parish. I've only been a parish priest for 2 years. I used to hear confessions in this monastery up in Michigan, hundreds of confessions. And so many people came to me with this attitude: Father, here's my freedom. You tell me what to do. And it's very important that we always refuse to pick up their freedom and to tell them what to do. But the roots of this attitude go back to the 8th century. Everything we are, by the way, in all the wrong ways, I should say, can be traced to these developments. Yet, as secular as this world had become, by the 12th century, it was very secular. It was so secular that it even invented the concept of nature. How often do we use the word nature? What does nature mean? It means a space which God maybe has created initially, and has set up rules for, but ultimately means something that functions on its own. The world is not nature, the world is creation, and that's an entirely different thing to call the world. But anyway, so by the 12th century, the secular world is fully entrenched in the Western psyche. But nevertheless, he was still keeping God at the center of life, and in the center of the universe too. This, however, changed in the 15th and 16th centuries. Even to the religious person, during the 15th and 16th centuries, the world ceased to be God-centric and became human-centric. It ceased to be centered in God and became centered in the human being. And this humanity, by the way, ended up defining itself by its will, by what it wants and what it chooses. Two more steps I would like to mention of this development. First is modernity. Modernity, which is actually promised as a change of life. It's a promise that not only I can change my life, but that I am actually in control of it. Modernity is predicated on the presupposition that I am the master of myself. So not only has God been removed out of the center of the universe, and I was put in the center a few centuries earlier, but now modernity is telling me not only that, you are the master. And modernity, lately you can witness this in all the movies, pretty much all the movies that come out of Hollywood, has also sold us on another story, that we all ought to be heroes. Spider-Man and Superman and Iron Man and all kinds of men. And women too. Wonder Women and everything. So this is what modernity does to us. Now post-modernity, and this is the last thing I mentioned, then I'm going to get to more spiritual things. I'm done with history, thank God. Post-modernity takes an extra step. It promises that this self of mine, of which I'm already in control, according to modernity, is actually fluid. Post-modernity is telling me not only that I'm in control of myself, that I actually can turn myself into whatever I want. And once I asked one of my students, do you think I could become a ballerina? And they were so locked by the question, because their postmodern mind and inclinations, of course, force them to answer in the positive. But one look at me generated doubt. But nevertheless, they still answered, yes, if you put your back into it, you, professor and doctor in school, can turn into a ballerina. I started laughing. I couldn't help myself. But I understood where they were coming from. They were perfect creatures of our times. Now, these developments, I'm done with history, thank God. These developments happen in the functioning of the human psyche. But with the manner in which the human mind functioned, came a different human being altogether. And actually came even a different God. And my question in front of you right now is, which human being do you think we are? And which God do you think we worship? The God of our tradition or the God of this story? After all, by the way, this shouldn't be surprising. How we view things depends on how we function. We always see and we always find what we are looking for. To give you only one example, those questions new for the 4th century, they were new then, eventually came to be the first step from moving safety or wellness from a petition to an expectation. In other words, at some point, people, under the pressure of those questions, stopped asking God, Lord, help me, because I don't know what to do, but ended up expecting not to be put in a difficult situation to begin with. And this is where a lot of you youngsters are today. And this is why you're not prepared for real life. And real life sucks, to put it, kindly. And this, anyway, it is one thing to ask for a difficulty to be alleviated, to be eased out, and another to expect it not to happen in the first place. Today, I believe a lot, especially of young people, are firmly entrenched in the latter situation. Thanks to these questions from the 4th century. You see, our lives were ruined many hundreds of years ago. Now, I would like to propose to you that we ask our present question, how? Also as a consequence of the ruinous shifts which I just mentioned. It is due to those shifts that it seems to us that there is something that we could do in order to accomplish the goal of our struggles, whichever those goals may be, to be good people, to overcome a passion, like this Christian in the 4th century, to solve a problematic situation, for example, in our families, to give someone a solution, to make someone or something better, etc. Whatever the difficulty is, we, because of these questions, because of that trajectory, we expect that there is a solution out there. All we have to do is to identify or figure out that which we can do. And we try very hard at whatever seems to be the solution, as hard as we can, or as hard as our heart inclines to it. We fast, we pray, we ask for blessings, we go to church, we kiss relatives, we read, we study, we read the scriptures, we study the church fathers. But it doesn't seem to work. So we are pressed here with a dilemma. Our understanding of how things work and our efforts do not generate the actual working. We want to be good Christians all around, but we don't seem to be able. We want to be good priests. We want to be good monastics, or we wish nothing more than to be good Christian husbands, or mothers, or sons, or daughters, boyfriends, girlfriends, colleagues, workers, choir singers, etc. Or we want to stop hating ourselves, or to stop hating our own lives, and we do not seem to be able to. The answer to our drama, this drama, is simple and liberating. but also crushing at the same time. Our efforts, regardless of what they are and how big they are, do not accomplish this goal, simply because we cannot accomplish anything. See, this is liberating, but it's also crushing. We are creatures which are simply incapable of victory. Let me remind you of a powerful verse in the Psalms. O my strength, I will keep watch for you. For you, O God, are the one who takes hold of me. My God, His mercy will come before me. This is in my translation, actually. I just completed a couple of years ago the translation of the Psalter with very close attention to the Greek. In other words, I am a creature who has no strength in itself and who cannot advance to God, but rather needs God to come before it. I cannot go to Him. So I, the psalmist, tell Him, Lord, why don't you come to me? And He does. My ineptitude is dire, is critical, is inescapable. The first prayer of the faithful in the liturgy of the pre-sanctified gifts asks God to accomplish all things in us, even our ascetical efforts. Even these, our little bit of fasting, our little bit of standing up during church, our little bit of prayer, even these are not ours. I quote this prayer. O great God, who art to be praised, who by the life-creating death of your Christ have borne us from corruption to incorruption, free all our senses from the rot of the passions, setting over them as a good ruler the reason that is within us. And let the eye abstain from every evil sight, the hearing be closed to idle talk, and the tongue be cleansed of unfitting words. Purify our lips that praise your Lord. Make our hands to refrain from wicked deeds, to do only that which is well-pleasing to you, fortifying all our members and our mind by your grace. End quote. So we cannot succeed. This message of this prayer is imprinted so that at least we priests never forget it, because we are the ones who read it on the Holy Bread. If you've ever prepared the Holy Bread, you know what I'm talking about. Because the Holy Bread is stamped with a special seal. And on the seal, there are, well, 3 words really, but they're split. Jesus Christ conquers. Jesus Christos Nika. What does this mean? It means that we don't conquer anything. He does. And that's liberating. But at the same time, it's very crushing, isn't it? What are our efforts then for? What purpose do they serve? One purpose only: to uncover from underneath all our pretenses the fact that we are needful creatures. We are needful, and therefore nothing is more natural to us than the fact that we wrong. And coming to the realization that this is our constitution is a major spiritual progress. Actually, it is the only progress we can make. This is as far as I can go on my own feet to tell the Lord, Lord, you are everything. I say that I am someone who is in need of everything, someone capable of nothing. This is why I fast, I pray, I keep vigil, I abstain from anything evil that it is given me to abstain from. This looking for God, this coming before God naked as I am, this is all that it is needed, actually. And this is all I can accomplish, to turn to Christ, to look at my God. The psalmist again says, and this is Psalm 118, again in my translation, which is more blunt, I have come before at an untimely hour, and I have cried. I have hoped in your words. My eyes have come before the dawn. Give me life. And he says that this looking at God went on to the point that, I quote again, my eyes have faded away for your salvation. In other words, I've been waiting for so long, but I know that I'm doing all I can, because everything that I can do is actually just to wait for you. This coming before God naked, as we are, is also the meaning of what the priest says in one of the evening prayers, the so-called prayers of the lighting of the lamps. And you don't hear them because we say them pretty much quietly. We mumble to ourselves in front of the holy doors or here in front of the holy table at Vespers, at the very beginning of the service of Vespers. And this is what we say. Quote, you, God, have counted us the sinners worthy to come before your face in confession and to offer you our evening hymn of glory. End quote. This is our confession, at once both of him and of us. We are naked, he is our clothing. Presenting ourselves to Christ as the needful creatures we are reveals something essential about spiritual life, about the life in God. Spiritual life is not the pursuit of the commandments. Such a burden, the desire and the effort to fulfill the commandments, one and all, can only crush even the most sober and dedicated believer. Rather, spiritual life is the facing of Christ, the turn to him who is everything and who comes to us. He comes to us as the fulfillment of everything, including of all the commandments. This makes our effort simple, single-minded, not complicated and scattered. This is the only thing needful to keep our eyes on Christ. Do you remember what he tells Martha when Martha complains about her sister not helping her out at dinner? She says to the Lord, Lord, tell my sister to help me. Look, all she's doing is sitting at your feet, listening to you, and I'm running around like crazy. And he tells her, you're worried about many things, but she has chosen the one thing which will never be taken away from her. The only needful thing, the only thing you need to do, which is to keep your eyes on me. This brings me into another aspect of our trauma, of the tragic situation in which we place ourselves in our misguided pursuits for procedures, for solutions. As it is now clear, that which we need, our need is only one, Christ. So it is also clear that as we pursue our question in all its many forms, and you know how these forms look like. How am I to be a good person? How am I to be a good Christian husband? How am I to be this or that? How am I to get out of this or that situation? As we ask our questions, we lose sight of him. This happens, namely we lose sight of him, precisely because we ask these questions not in spite of asking them. Due to such questions, in our misguided and scattered quest, the desire to conquer our own lives, to have them in our control. Even the things which Christ himself gave us, the gospel, the commandments, the parables, even these things come to stand in between him and us, and come to obscure him. And all his gifts come to us in ways in which they destroy us. We could speak here of the terror of the commandments, but I need to fulfill this one, I need to fulfill that one. Indeed, we can so shift our focus away from him, even in our best efforts in the very life of the church, to one detail or another, to Christ's one word or another, to his one revelation or another, that everything we struggle for can be ruined immediately and sink to the bottom of anxiety and despair. We are scattered, and thus we do not see Christ who is one. And this last observation brings me to another aspect of the life, which makes this obscuring even worse: our pain, our suffering. And I introduced that yesterday, so I'm coming full circle. We often wallow in the mud of being beaten down by thieves on our own life's trip from Jerusalem to Jericho, to reference another well-known parable. And you know I'm referring to the parable of the Good Samaritan. We, by the way, are the person in the ditch. There, down in the mud of our own life events, we grow in our minds and hearts a troubled conscience, a psychological trauma of regret and desires and wounds, which only hopes for relief. The relief may be a confession, or a sense of having fulfilled the commandment of another, of not being too bad, or the pursuit of spiritual life itself, as we see it. Whatever the relief is, this relief we're looking for, this sort of psychological fix, is not what Christ wants from us. It is not the real state of confessing to which the prayer of the lamplighting refers. It is rather the opposite of a real confessing state. It is a sort of temporary unburdening of a loaded ego, bound to be followed by heavier loads and greater trauma. Because in all this, the real tragedy of our life, the mud in which our misplaced conscience is thus troubled and is looking for fixes, which ultimately is our mistaken negative attitude in front of our life, particularly in front of our suffering and failures. This real tragedy of our life is intact and only deepening. We get ourselves deeper and deeper into the ditch to the extent to which we have these attitudes. Even in our best spiritual efforts, as long as we are in the ditch of this psychological drama, we do not truly reach out to Christ, even if we call out His name, because we do not truly show ourselves to Him, covered by the dirt and leaves of our self-pity and our self-measure and our self-condemnation and judgment, and hiding behind the bush of our pretenses. Even when we seem to answer Him, we do not truly converse with Him. We are still locked up in our own troubled self. Christ does not want us to relate to Him in any complicating and suffocating ways, but rather simply, and I'm quoting here another psalm, also in my translation, "Cease and know that I am the Lord." So we could speak of a ceasing, of a rest which takes place in us, mirroring in a way the rest which is Christ Himself. It is our needfulness facing the one we need. And this facing leads us to the embodiment of the very one we look at, leads to having our lives merging with His, or rather to have His life as our life. This orientation toward Him is an allowance I give to God, an allowance He is patiently waiting for. I permit Him His existential union with me, union in which His life reaches into my soul, into my heart, down to the deepest and darkest corners of my being. My God enters me and makes me a little God. This allowance of the life of God within me is all I can do. I have to say it again. And this I do by exposing my nakedness. Remember how Elder Emilianos put it in one of the quotes I read yesterday, by the way, if you were here yesterday. He said the following: God will enlighten you to understand that there is a snake concealed in the grass, but only He can remove it. There is no procedure for removing the snake which can master which we can master, and which we can conduct. This is, in my opinion, one of the most important things to understand about our faith. There is no procedure, there is no technique, there is no how. Rather, there is only the encounter of an ant with the Lion of Judah. This is most important to understand, first and foremost, because it is liberating. It is truly our freedom. Also, if other faiths can be placed in sharp contrast to our own, they are thus placed not so much because they have turned all things into precise definitions and measures. Some of them have not. But even those which have not, even those which see symbolism, such as, for example, Catholicism, which sees the wine and the wafer as ultimate symbols of mystery, even they have nevertheless turned the process itself, which leads from wine to blood, into something precise, something even technological, into a procedure. Moreover, the promises which this way of being human, self-controlled and procedural, focused on the heart, the promises which this way offers have become appealing to our own brothers and sisters. I do not know the ultimate source of what I'm hearing more and more often these days. All I know is that they're crushing the young people in my own parish. What I'm hearing refers to an Orthodox phronime, which at a look from the spiritual standpoint of our tradition, betrays its pursuit of intellective questions and its commitment to procedures. For all practical purposes, what the people who speak this way are after is the replacement of non-Orthodox categories of thought, of a certain logic and certain foci of mind, with Orthodox categories of thought, Orthodox logic, Orthodox foci of mind. Of course, this proposal and this growing manner of talking come from Orthodox sources, as I said. But what they say is nevertheless mountains and valleys and oceans away, or rather a world away from our tradition. This is so because there are no such things as Orthodox categories of thought, logic, and foci. Because all these things belong to this world, to the human mind and to the troubled human psyche, to the man who is lost and always ready to conquer. In other words, they belong to the realm of the human ego. And our faith is out of this world. Our faith is life in heaven. And this is, in my opinion, the greatest abandonment of our tradition and the most destructive one. Not the replacement of some ideas with others, neither the abandonment of some practices for others. These changes happen only in consequence of a deeper, more pervasive shift, which is the supplanting of the very being of our tradition, which is internal, physical, ascetical, informal, unskilled, mystical, soteriological, poetic, therapeutic. The replacement of this being of our tradition by intellections, by procedures, by methods, by evaluations, concepts, precisions, strategies, arguments, pronouncements. In other words, for all practical purposes, all these recent talks of Orthodox phronime propose another non-Orthodox mind, just with an Orthodox vocabulary. They too have an answer to the how question, which is why they are both so appealing and so mistaken. Thank you.